Adam, great to speak to you. We're talking at a time, a bit of an uncertain time for boxing, I guess. 10 or so days following the fight between Jack Catterall and Josh Taylor. What are your reflections now? You're ringside on the night, but you've had a bit of time to digest it. How do you feel about it all?
I feel very similar to how I did on fight night. I'm glad that I did actually experience this fight in the arena, because the argument is always it's very different watching a fight when you're ringside compared to when you're watching it on TV. So to experience it firsthand in the arena with the crowd, which was very pro Josh Taylor and obviously reacting to every single shot that he throws, you can kind of understand, even though it shouldn't be necessarily this way, but you can kind of understand the thoughts and the feelings of what the judges were seeing, because there was only 2 rows behind these judges when they were obviously calling through this fight. Since I've come home, watched the fight with commentary, granted, it's very pro towards Jack Catterall, as it should be, because Jack Catterall, in my opinion, wins the fight. And then I've also watched it on mute as well. And my opinion of how the fight plays out has absolutely not changed. For me, Jack Catterall wins, and he wins 8 rounds to 4. Yes, there's deductions in there, but he wins that fight quite comfortably. The alarming things for me since that, because we're, like you said, we're 10 days removed from it. I've had many, many conversations with loads of people, different people connected to it, whether it be the British Boxing Board of Control, whether it be Jack himself, his trainer, whether it be Ben Shalom, who was the co-promoter. The alarming thing for me that is screaming off the page at the moment is there seems to be a reluctance within the British Boxing Board of Control to want to change. I think it's evident from speaking to Jack, the fighter, the trainer in Jamie Moore, the promoter in Ben Shalom. They have an understanding and a realization that change is needed. They've kind of pointed us in the direction of the British Boxing Board of Control. Speaking to Robert Smith, there doesn't seem to want to be a change there right now. It's hard for us to comment because they haven't concluded their investigation. They're saying that they're going to do that this week with Ian John Lewis. Personally, I would be investigating all 3 referees because I think all 3 of them got it wrong, not necessarily just one. But once that is concluded, it's going to be interesting to see how this moves forward, because we can't be in a situation again where something like this happens. And the reason why I've blown this one up even bigger than what we would normally do, because we've seen some bad decisions in the past. This was for the Undisputed Championship of the World. The chance of fighting for all 4 belts and a Ring Magazine belt are very, very limited because of the politics that do play out in the game of boxing. We can't be telling our next generation of fighter, work 10, 15, 20 years of your life, dedicate that amount of time of your life to becoming the very best in the business. And when you get there and you do it right in front of our eyes, we're going to steal that dream from you. That can't happen anymore. We need to have fundamental change, because the business, if you can call it that, of the British Boxing Board of Control is broken. It's not fit for purpose in its current state, and it needs to change.
One thing we've seen in the last few weeks, we had the Josh Taylor-Jack Catterall fight. But then a few weeks before, we had John Ryder taking on Danny Jacobs, both fairly close fights. That was much closer, I'd say, than the Josh Taylor-Jack Catterall fight. But once again, the home fighter got the result. Do you think we're in a particularly bad state, or has it been like this for a long time?
I think it's been like this for a long time. It's difficult because I don't think it's any one individual's particular fault. I think it's just a period of time where things have just become the norm. It's always been that way. It doesn't mean it's right, but it's always been that way. And I think there's a lot of subconscious thoughts that come now into the way that fights are scored. For example, like your audience may not know, the officials that turn up to a fight night, their hotel expenses, their travel expenses are all paid for by the promoter. That can't be right, because if you think about that from a subconscious point of view, let's say we go on a trip courtesy of a promoter, and they put us up in a lovely room, and they pay our room bill, and they look after us throughout the course of the week. They show us the sights of Glasgow as we were last week. Subconsciously, even though nobody's coming up to me with a brown envelope and going, there you go, pal, you know which side your bread's buttered, subconsciously, you then start to warm to that side. It's just human nature. That's going to happen. So when you sit down on fight night, ringside, you're thinking to yourself, right, yeah, I'm in Glasgow. He's the Glasgow fighter. They've been billing this guy all week, right? Everybody's telling me this guy's probably going to win, right? subconsciously, even though it shouldn't be the case, subconsciously you're already favouring one guy. So when you do get tight rounds, and I'm not disputing the fact that there was some tight rounds in this fight in Glasgow, you're going to sway one way. And you're probably more than likely going to sway the way that you're more emotionally connected to. That's what I'm talking about regarding the system. That system's got to be broken up. We can't have promoters involved in any way, shape or form with officials, whether it be conscious or subconsciously. They've got to be a separate entity, so therefore they can referee and judge the fights fairly.
So what changes would you therefore make to the British Boxing Board of Control? Because from what we understand, it's run on a shoestring. So whether or not it can have an elite panel, which it pays a full-time salary, is something which is unclear. But how would you fix it? Because it's clear something needs to be done, because you speak to a number of different fighters, a number of different components. Everybody says something needs to be done, but very few people seem to have the answers.
Well, you touched upon something there, funding. This is the first thing that I would be looking into. I'm not as powerful as these promoters or these sanctioning bodies or various other people, but the first thing that I would be looking at is the funding that comes in to boxing, whether it be at grassroots or whether it be into the British Boxing Board of Control. If you remember, we've gone through this situation with the pandemic recently, haven't we? And when everybody went on furlough, there was a big uproar because boxing got nothing. You had sports like athletic, rugby, badminton getting funding off the government in order to keep their sanctioning bodies rolling throughout the course of the pandemic. Boxing got diddly squat, literally not a bean. So you're right to bring up the funding situation, because the British Boxing Board of Control is technically a charity. There's a lot of volunteers that are participating in the running of that organization. Boxing is a multi-million-dollar industry run by a charity. How on God's green earth can we get the best talent, the best people through that organization if they're doing it for free? That just doesn't work. So the first point is that we do have to go higher than the British Boxing Board of Control. We've got to go into governments. We've got to be speaking to the MPs. We've got to be saying to the sports minister, what are you doing? Not only does this fantastic sport save lives of many kids that are going down the wrong way, but when they then decide to get involved in the sport, we have to give them a real path to glory. So therefore, when they get to the path of glory, it's not going to be stolen from them. So funding, absolutely. My big thing is also the way that we judge fights, because if you go on the British Boxing Board of Control website, there is no criteria. In fact, throughout the whole course of boxing, this is going to sound mad to people that aren't boxing fans, there is no unified criteria of how to judge a fight. So if you go on the WBC's website, they have their pillars of how you score a fight. The WBA have something very, very different. The WBA even give you a pat on the back for sportsmanship. What's that all about? Do you get a point for touching gloves at the start of the fight? The British Boxing Board of Control have got 3 lines. There's a 100-page document on their website. They've got 3 lines on how to score a fight. That's not good enough. This can't be ambiguous anymore, because that then opens the door for the word corruption and people's interpretation of how to score a fight. Let's have it black and white. Let's have it like Moses' 10 Commandments. Let's have it there on the website. This is how you score a fight. This is what we're looking for. And if we're all going to adhere to the 10-point must system, we should be looking for clean punches, effective aggression, ring generalship, and defense. That's it. That's all you need to do. And if you go back then to the fight that we're talking about in Glasgow between Josh and Jack, when you're talking about clean punches, Josh Taylor outlands Jack Catterall with clean punches in one of the 12 rounds. Now, of course, you've got other things to consider, like effective aggression, where you could most certainly give him the 2nd and the 7th round as well. So now you're up to 3 rounds for Josh Taylor. Ian John Lewis gave him 8. It is virtually impossible to give Josh Taylor 8 rounds in that fight. It's impossible to give him 7 as Victor Loughlin did. So a clear scoring criteria mapped out on the British Boxing Board of Control website, I think, is absolutely the easiest thing that the British Boxing Board of Control could do tomorrow. But moreover, I think the funding issue, let's turn this out of a charity and let's turn it into a proper business so we can invest in some proper talent to be able to train the next generation, some new blood in there, some younger blood, because it is, let's be honest, it's an old boys club. And let's move this game forward, because it's archaic at the moment.
When it comes to the judging of fights, I think there'll always be that subjectivity, won't there? Because everybody will have slightly different scorecards. But do you think by maybe improving the criteria or making it clearer? Because one thing I think we suffer from in boxing is the fact that fans necessarily are scoring fights in a different way to judges. And when you list the different governing bodies and the criteria they have are either not there or very different, then maybe that's something we need to consider as well. But do you think by taking away some subjectivity when it comes to criteria, it will improve things and we'll start getting results which fans are seeing? The fans are getting the same result as what the judges are seeing, which is really important for transparency, and people can trust the product.
Of course, everybody's guessing at the moment. Even I'm guessing, because there isn't, like I say, a universal criteria to score a fight. Fans are guessing, officials, everybody's guessing. Like you've just said, it's open to your interpretation. I hate that phrase. We hear it all the time, don't we? We switch on the TV. It goes, well, it's going to be a tight one. It comes down to what you like. How can that be elite level sport when there's multi-million pounds on the line? Ridiculous. No other sport in the world does this, where people are just guessing at the result. Right, it's gone the distance. Who won? Well, I like that guy. Come on, man. You're changing people's lives. Let's have a universal criteria that goes right across the board. All the sanctioning bodies, all the state athletic commissions, we are working towards these rules and regulations. The amount of conversations I've had in the last 10 days with fighters that have told me that they have never, ever been sat down and explained how a fight is scored is frightening. You enter any sport in this game as a child. You enter the sport, the rules and regulations of the sport are given to you. This is how you win the game. This is how you play the game. And we go from there. Boxing doesn't have that. Get in there, do something, and then somebody will decide whether you win or not. Well, what have I got to do to win? Well, we think you've got to punch him. You've got to punch him more than he punches you. Right, sweet as a nut. Jack Catterall punched him more than Josh Taylor punched him. But I didn't win. Mate, somebody else, they were making it up as we're going along. Unified criteria, black and white, is exactly what we need.
I finally wanted to get your thoughts on Anthony Joshua, because he's been speaking at the weekend about what's going on with the training situation. I guess there's still a bit of mystery and uncertainty around his next fight because of the situation Alexander Usyk is in Ukraine. But one thing we do now know is that Angel Fernandez is most likely going to be his main trainer now moving forward. What do you make of that? Because he spent some time in the States working with a number of different trainers before Christmas, but it looks like he's going to stick with someone he's worked with over the last 3 years.
Yeah, two things on that, and I'm glad that you brought up the Usyk situation in Ukraine there, James. I've seen so much on social media where people are going, the heavyweight division needs to move on. We need to be doing this. We need to be taking them belts, and AJ can't be hanging around. Jog on. There's bigger things going on in this world than boxing. Alexander Usyk's got as much time as he needs. He is dealing with something far bigger than what we are concerned about with the heavyweight division, and we will wait for him. No doubt about that. The Angel Fernandez thing, it was a surprise, I've got to be honest, because like you said, he's been working with AJ for a period of time as his one down. Now, obviously, he's going up to main coach. Where does Robert McCracken fit into that? Are they swapping roles? What's happening? Don't really know, but we're being told that Angel Fernandez is the guy. We saw that AJ was working with so many different trainers over in the States. And there were a few that he was working with. I'm thinking, that would be really good. Someone like a Robert Garcia, I was looking at that and thinking, that could be quite decent, man. You know what I mean? If you can turn him into a bit of a Mikey Garcia type of fighter, I think that could be quite good. Because for me, AJ needs to let those combinations flow. And if you look at recent teachings from Angel Fernandez, and listen, he might change it up for the camps that are coming up, but the recent teachings are more concentrated on being precise with one shot. I don't think that works for AJ against Alexander Usyk when this fight happens. The combinations have to flow. But who am I to talk about this? Because Anthony Joshua has obviously worked with this guy. He's got a relationship with this guy. His team have got an understanding of how this guy works, and maybe he likes the teachings that are coming his way. He needed to change something because it didn't work the last fight, and he's made that change. You've got to trust in that change, and when this fight happens, we will find out whether he made the right decision. But again, just going back to the first point, there's no rush for this fight. Alexander Usyk's got bigger fish to be frying at this moment in time. It may even, I know this is bad, but it may even allow Anthony Joshua to have an interim fight in before obviously Alexander Usyk's ready. Usyk might not be ready for a year. We don't know how long this conflict's going on for. So it might allow Anthony Joshua to have an interim fight to get used to having Angel Fernandez as his number one. That could be an interesting dynamic.
That's a real possibility, isn't it? Because I thought with Alexander Usyk and everybody in Ukraine, there is so much uncertainty. This is something that could go on for a seriously long time. It could go on for years. we're not sure what Alexander will do. But it's quite interesting that the idea of AJ having a tune-up fight, an interim fight, which could maybe do him some good. What would be an ideal sort of opponent? Because AJ is such a big name now. It's very difficult for him to take a fight which is not Mickey Mouse, but somebody who's far down the ladder when it comes to the rankings.
Yeah, and it's going to be very difficult to find someone that mimics Alexander Usyk because he's just an anomaly. He's a phenomenal fighter. Oh man, who would you? Do you know something? It would have to be someone obviously top 10. I think I'm not against him fighting someone just to get the confidence back, because with all due respect, Alexander Usyk did put a bit of a lesson on him. And I just think he needs to go and get that old streetwise AJ back. The guy that fought pre-Klitschko, the guy that was just knocking dudes out for fun and he was doing it early. Get in there, rough some dudes up and absolutely go to town and get the confidence back, get the mojo back. So therefore, when the opportunity does come to fight Alexander Usyk for the unified championship of the world, mentally he's like, well, I know I can do it. Can I do it against this guy? And we'll find out, man.